take a look at 9 Years' War, War of the Grand Alliance. This is using the No Peace Without Spain system. More than that, it can be played as a prequel to No Peace Without Spain. I just replayed No Peace Without Spain, and a lot of people ask me why did I buy this, because my original review for it was not all that positive. Mainly I griped a lot about how simple the system is. Well, within that, I've grown over a couple of other playings and some consideration. Not to disagree with my initial review particularly, but to think that the focus was too much on the simplicity and that it really wasn't a good simulation. And actually, it is not a bad simulation. What it is, and I think what comes across more in my review, is kind of flavorless, and I expect this to have some of the same aspects to it. I probably went over the rules for No Peace Without Spain, given when I did it. This uses almost the same rule set. However, there are a few little gotchas, and I'm going to go over the rules again, just because, well, trying to get into the habit of doing videos, and this is the new place first video for. Okay, let's see what we can talk about. Well, first of all, the board itself, point-to-point system. Fortresses are the little stars. Squares are non-fortified spaces. There's 3 types of terrain in the game, basically. These guys here, which are fertile zones with this kind of greenish stuff. I'm getting a bad glare from my overhead lights and maybe the light there. I'll try to deal with it as best as I can, but it's going to be kind of painful for you. Normal spaces have nothing, and then there's rough terrain with kind of these mountain type things in it. A few off-map, semi-map boxes. These are Alliance-only spaces. The little red lines indicate only the Alliance can travel along them, and they cost 2 movement points instead of 1 to cross. And where you see these little arrows, that's going to be an indication. So the main thing the terrain does in this game is it informs the stacking for the game. And the base stacking is 4 units, or 4 core, but core is fairly vague here. 4 core in a space that's rough terrain, 8 core in a normal space, and 12 core in a fertile space. But there's twisty stuff to them. The main units in the game, just single strength point core. On the back side, they're a half point, which is a reduced core. And that's, you have your leaders who have 2 numbers on them. The top number is their sort of tactical capabilities, and that includes both movement and combat capabilities, basically. And then the lower number is their ability, their command ability, how many units they can haul around with them when they move. You have some control boxes for the seas. You can notice, well, now the Atlantic's in play. Yeah. And both sides are going to have fleets in this game, not just the French. The French were constantly trying to gain control of the Mediterranean. Turn record track, and it provides you with turn record tracks for both games because it's intended that you'll play. If you play the Grand Campaign, you'd play both games on here. It would also be possible to play No Peace Without Spain on here with a few little modifications, because now we have Ireland. And I think that's really the only major difference. There are some slight differences in the rules, though, elsewhere. You have this general record track here, where you keep track of how much production per turn is available, victory points. Some army boxes, they're really just a convenience. A bunch of charts and tables that cover all kinds of stuff. Most importantly, the sequence of play. This event sheet. Okay, so this is where, in the original game, there were spaces on the board where you could throw some cards down. Instead, they're going to use this. But because you'd be playing both games on the same board, you flip this over, and it's got an event sheet for the other game. The counter mix is a little different, and there's some kind of funky things in it that I don't know how much I support. Game uses a lot of dice. It comes with a fair fistful. I think like 4 of each or 6 of each or something. I pulled some more out. And they are actually these cool little dice that I like with the rounded corners, which is pretty awesome. And a bunch of cards. Like in No Peace Without Spain, you have 2 decks of cards. You have your action cards, which are going to be numbered from 1 to 3, with the preponderance being 2s. And those are your those are the operational points that you have available, or whatever, ops points that you have available in a normal CDG, but they have no events or anything associated with them. So you get a handful of numbers, and those are how many you're going to get to do. You don't have that hard choice between using numbers or an event. The events are going to be drawn, 2, 1 by each player per turn, and some of them enter the game later. Again, this is all very much like on No Peace Without Spain. You don't have much choice with the events. There's a few hold cards, most of the cards which can affect your normal play in the game. Most of the cards, though, are some event that is pretty random. Now, I like divorcing the events from the action cards in theory, in terms of like, well, I shouldn't be able to control this through the card particularly or whatever. Yeah, that's always bothered me with the CDGs, especially when something feels very definitely that the player shouldn't have much control over it. This takes that out of the way, but as I mentioned in No Peace Without Spain, you could just have a random events chart for all that that provides. Right. Let's take a look at the rules. The rule book's gotten thicker. Not all of it appears particularly to be of importance. Like they've bloated it up with more pictures and stuff, I guess. Okay, stacking is one of the first things I want to talk about here because it's a little funky. So, yeah, I'll talk about the leaders as well. So, the leaders in both games have a situation where whatever color they are, so like James here is a Jacobite. Well, he's actually the British at this point, but this leader is an Imperial. We've got several different countries in the game, but it's a 2-player game with 2 main alliances. A little bit of fluctuation within them is possible, mainly from event cards, but other things as well. If a leader doesn't have a core of his correct nationality, he loses a point off his tactical ability. So, a leader like Boufflers here is a 1-4. He would drop down to not being much better than a generic leader if he doesn't have any French with him. The French, there are lots of French. Okay, let's talk about the stacking, because this is one of the things, and I probably screwed it up in my last play through that I videoed, the last one that I videoed, and I certainly screwed it up when I was playing No Peace Without Spain to kind of warm up for this. Caught myself halfway through. There's a not very hard limit in terms of stacking because the spaces are quite large, etc. But if you happen to be in a situation where you're overstacked, and there are different kinds of overstacking, you pay a penalty. So the first thing, and this is the most complicated of them all, is that the number of full core that you have, if it's greater than half the stacking capability of the space, you reduce the remaining core above that limit. So over here, you're allowed to have 4 core here, but only 2 of them can be full strength. And that's very difficult for me to not just remember, but it creates some kind of annoying calculations that you have to do in your head constantly about trying to keep the sizes right. And it's not that big a deal, but it is a little mechanical burden. Okay, the other penalties are you won't be allowed to reinforce into those hexes, even if it's just building back core. If there's any kind of if there's normal overstacking in play. And you're not allowed to activate more units moving into a space. You can't voluntarily overstack. There's a few cases where overstacking can happen where it's kind of involuntary. Okay. You're allowed to attack the enemy. It's in the same space. Everything's open. Okay. Victory points for the game are generally going to be based on the spaces. So fortresses, regular fortresses have 1 strength point in them. These guys have 2, some of them may have 3. That's how many victory points they're worth. So when they change hands, the victory point track moves by that many spaces. Some spaces, though, exceed their normal victory points. So like St. Quentin here, it's worth 5 victory points instead of the 1 it would be worth for being a fortress. This is worth 5 instead of being worth 0. And it's that many points when it switches hands, except under certain extraordinary circumstances. And those are kind of weird, like some events will hand you stuff for free, but they become kind of a burden because you've just gained some victory points. You've gained potential victory points you can lose. That may not be a big deal, but in terms of that effect, but it feels kind of funny that you're not getting anything on the victory point chart. Okay, there's a couple of other things that affect victory points here. King William's War up here. This has a victory point track on it. If you start pushing in this direction, which is the pro-Allied direction, Allies want positive victory points. When they first move into this space, 1 victory point's accumulated there. Here, that stays the same. Here, another victory point's available. There's basically 2 victory points in either direction available there. Anytime a famous victory happens, and those are fairly rare, that's worth 2 victory points to the person who has it. It has some other bonus effects as well. And whenever a naval battle occurs, a successful sortie will increase the victory point value by 1 in your favor. Okay, what's this? All right, for some reason this is dumped into the victory points, I guess. There are a couple other things that can cause victory points. When a leader's captured, you can surrender victory points equal to his tactical rating, and that'll bring him back to play. You've ransomed him off or whatever. Now, some leaders are special. James II, Max Emanuel, William III, and Victor Amadeus. They will either have a star or have their name underlined on their marker. If they're eliminated by battle or siege, they're worth 2 victory points. And most of them are probably 1-point guys. I'm not sure about Victor Amadeus. If their name is underlined, Max Emanuel, William III, and Victor Amadeus, and they're captured, they must be ransomed back. You cannot voluntarily eliminate them. If their named leader's side is starred, James II, for example, and they're captured in battle or siege, they can't be ransomed back and must be eliminated. Okay. By the way, we're in the period post-YouTube getting rid of their editor. I've got a little video splicer, so I'm counting on that working, but things might get screwed up. During winter quarters phase, the Alliance player loses 2 victory points if Bourbon has control of London. Since the victory points is all on one track, you know, it's not really like, oh, I gain a victory point and you lose 1. It's just a single value there. Okay. The game is won during a winter quarters phase at the end of the turn when certain locations that are automatic victory. So Paris is an automatic victory if the Alliance is there, and Vienna and Amsterdam if the French can get there. Now they don't just have to capture it, they have to be able to trace a line of control back to their capital, and the capitals there are limited. The other way it can happen is victory point value of 35 or higher will be an Alliance victory, and that drops down to 30 for no peace without Spain. And and if a victory point drops down to 0, all the way at the other end of the track, then it's a French victory. Otherwise, if you make it all the way to the end of the game, whatever that is, and that may not be the last turn on the track. It can end early. Then you compare the amount of victory points you had, and you get a victory point value here. So 19 or less, it's a major Bourbon win. 30 or more, gee, it's a major alliance win. At the beginning of Winter Quarters phase in 1696, starting in 1696, the Bourbons have to make a peace roll. The non-initiative player and then the initiative player both have the option to drop an action card and or get 2 less resource points during their next turn. And that'll modify along with certain events in the game. You roll a die, and if there's a 10 or higher, then the game ends. The forfeits are an attempt to keep the game running. Everything else, like one fortified Spanish home space outside Spain, is Bourbon controlled. Okay, fine. Everything else appears to be in favor of the French, except for maybe time. So these are sort of a willingness of a peace to break out by the French getting enough, I guess. I don't know. Okay. Some of the countries are going to jump around. In this case, Savoy can become neutral. And there's special rules for this. Portugal will always be neutral in 9 Years' War. The Catalan Spanish Corps can be built in any Bourbon-controlled space in Spain once a line of control exists. Okay, the Jacobites, those are the Catholic English, Scottish, and Irish supporters of James II. Now, at the beginning, the Jacobites are the Brits, i.e. James is king. There are 5 total Jacobite corps in the game. 4 are available at the start of the game, and the final one comes in if the Scotland Rises card is played. Jacobites are considered a regular power with only 2 home spaces, London and York. After the Glorious Revolution, all spaces in Great Britain and Ireland will be home spaces for the Jacobites, who has 3 capitals, London, Paris, and the Highlands. Yeah, Paris. All spaces in Great Britain and Ireland count as home space. We already talked about that. Britain and Ireland, what's this? And the Jacobites have to be able to trace a line of control to Paris from spaces, but they can actually trace it even if they don't have control of the sea zone. If James II is in a French home space, a single Jacobite corps can be built in that space if it has a line of control, line of communication to Paris. Controlled spaces, and no other Jacobite corps are in play outside Great Britain and Ireland. I'm not saying the British themselves, but okay. All right. Let's go over the sequence of play, and I'll try to go less into the rules than I have been. Event card phase. So each player will be drawing an event card. Now, in this game, the initiative player chooses who draws the first event. It doesn't really matter too much. You probably want to force the other guy to draw the first event because then you'll get to see what happens, but maybe you know something. Okay, if it's 1693 or 1708, new event cards are shuffled into the deck, which means that not all the events come out, but almost all of them are guaranteed to come out, especially from the first deck. Like, there's 2 events that don't come out before the reshuffle, and I think there's 2 even if you make it to the end of the game. At least that's no peace without Spain. Okay. You also are allowed to commit to King William's War, which wish we had a number there, but basically what happens there is each player can decide to withdraw, to forfeit a single action card draw from their next turn. That'll flip the King William's War counter over. It's got an alliance side on the other side. This can only be done once per game per player and never twice in one turn. If one player does it, the other player can't undo that. Then you roll a die to see about King William's War. The current controller of the Atlantic adds 1 to his total. Ties are won by the side currently dominant in the colonies. Whoever has the thing face up. And if the alliance wins the die roll, it moves to the right. If the Bourbon win it, it moves to the left. And then that'll be the victory point value that's achieved for it. That's not a per turn victory point value, that's the total victory point value of the war. During each reinforcement phase, you can spend a resource point to place a control marker on your side. Let me try to show you how that'll happen. I can do this without trying to slip a bookmark in. So you can place a Bourbon control marker over here, and then if it goes in the Bourbon's favor, it'll jump over that space, and you get a better effect out of it. That costs you a resource, though. You can do that multiple times over the course of the game. And we failed. We did not go to the page we wanted to be on. Right. Okay. Then we go to a Marlborough roll. Okay, if Marlborough's in play on the British side, on a 5 through 6, he's removed from the game. I don't know about this. I know Marlborough had some problems with William. He doesn't seem to reappear according to the special campaign rules. I think that probably is something that should be changed or added. Maybe there's a errata already out. This fairly new game. Okay, then we hit the reinforcement phase. The initiative player chooses who goes first. Now, this is interesting. In No Peace Without Spain, the event card phase was set in a certain order. The reinforcements phase was set in a certain order. The alliance always went first for these things. In general, if you're the initiative player, you probably don't want to go first, especially in the reinforcements phase, where you spend your points to build units and restore corps, and to build fortify lines, to commission the fleet. You place your reinforcements, you promote and move your leaders around on the board as you like. Well, clearly, there doesn't seem to be any advantage to going first in that case. You show your hand to the other person, essentially. So now this has been switched to based on the initiative player. The initiative player is really just based on time. Over here, the alliance has the initiative. Over here, the Bourbon do. This is, I believe, a couple of special turns that are never going to be actually played. This is the end of this game in 1699. We will go on to No Peace Without Spain if the game tells us to. You don't need No Peace Without Spain to play this, though. You can play just the Grand Alliance War. All right. You're basically able to place reinforcements if you can trace back to your home capital. Obviously, if your only capital for that particular nation is conquered, you're not going to be able to trace back to it. Then we go to the campaign phase, and a bunch of action cards are shuffled together and dealt out. I know in No Peace Without Spain it's 5 each. I think that's the same here, but there are certain special rules for certain special turns. You determine the first player. Now, the way first player is determined is if one person has more cards than the other person at the beginning of the turn, or at this point, when you get your cards, they're automatically going to have to play the first card. If that's not the case, both players play a card face down, they're revealed. Whoever plays the higher value, and let's see if this has changed. There are some weird little things that have changed, and I fear this is one of them. Yeah. Whoever plays the higher value gets to go first. Now this is weird because going for, and that's the same as no piece without spin. This is weird because going first again is not usually an advantage. Quite often you want to see what the other guy's going to do before you react. But on the other hand, if you want to do some reinforcing of your forces, if you want to move an additional force into play, into location, whatever, there might be a reason you want to get the jump on. Generally, the person who's in the best position to attack may be less interested in going first. It's usually best, shoring up your defenses is usually the main desire to go first. But on the other hand, if the other guy has weak defenses, hey, let's go in there. Okay. I didn't go into all the costs for the reinforcement phase. Why don't we jump back there? So, core, flipping them over from half strength to full strength, costs you 1 point. You can do that pretty much if you can trace back to your home capital. And each nation has a limit to how many of them they can do. For most it's 2. The French, I believe, have allowed 4 in this, 3 when we switch to the other game. Building full core. They can only be built in your home country, has to be able to trace back to the capital, and they cost 2 points, resource points. Now, the French only have like 4 resource points, and the Brits have 6 here, or the Allies have 6. They're not. The Brits all the time are not allied. Fortified lines cost 1 per level of the line, and you need something like 6 core in the space. I don't know, it's 5 or 6 core in the space to be able to build one. You'll have to control the space. Obviously, if you're there, you control the space at this point in the turn. And you can only build a level, well, you can only build fortified lines outside of rough territory. You can only build a level 2 fortified line, which costs 2 points, in one of the fertile spaces. And these give you a lot of advantages in combat. Okay. So the basic flow of the campaign phase is going to be one person plays a card, it has a number on it, 1 to 3, and they take that many actions. And there's a whole plethora of different actions you can take. Campaign is the sort of common one, which is you spend one of your action points. Each piece on the board can only be affected by one of these points in any given card play. That's kind of a weird way to put it. But basically, you can only activate each piece once, even if there are many things you might want it to do. Like you might want it to do replacement and rally and all kind of other stuff, and then do a campaign. Nah, you can only affect each piece with one of these. Okay, so you pick a force. A force is defined as up to, well, as many leaders as you like in the square, in the space, and a number of troops equal to, a number of core, including half-strength core, equal to the sum of 2 of the leader's command abilities. Lower number here. Okay. That many units can move. They can't move into an overstack position or whatever. It's 1 movement point per space that they move. They have 3 movement points together in a campaign action. Transfer allows you to pick up basically 2 pieces, either core or leaders, and move them, and core can move up to 4 spaces, but they can't enter enemy territory, and leaders, I believe, can move 6. Replacement, you're allowed to you're allowed to do this only once per round. Oh, you're only allowed to transfer once per round as well. You're allowed to do this only once per round, and you take a weakened force that can trace back to its capital, and you flip it up to its one side. This is a way to get additional troops without spending resources. Rally. You can do this once per round per leader, and I believe it's only once once per space, actually, once per round per leader space, which is to say 2 different leaders in the same space can't both rally separate units. And the leader is allowed to rally up to half, rounded up, his command rating. So Buffler here would be able to rally 2 units. He would be rallied, and 2 of his corps would be rallied. This is important because in combat, demoralized units don't fight very well. You can do a C move. You're only allowed 1 per round. Unlike No Peace Without Spain, you don't have to control the sea area. But the chances of losses go up if you don't. When we switch to No Peace Without Spain, I believe the rules switch. And you can deploy a fleet, which if you already have commissioned a fleet, which costs you $1 or $2, depending on how strong a fleet you want to commission, you can send it out to sail to try to take control of the sea area. All right, I'm running out of battery, so hey, there's my little battery charger. I have to swap out, and we'll get to test my video splicer. Hey, I got a full battery. Excellent. Never sure. All right. So let's take a look at some of the specifics to these rules. So first of all, the sea rules in this are a little different. The New York scenario, no. It sure looks like to me. The Atlantic's uncontrolled and the Mediterranean's going to be Bourbon controlled. And I should have a little Bourbon marker here. No, actually, I should have the fleet there. I don't know what happened to it. It's up here. I gotta put it in play. Okay. So the control changes either through an event card, there's a couple of them that change the Atlantic, or during naval battles. And during winter phase, certain cards will keep control in one side or the other. And it'll flip over at the end of the turn, essentially. Now let's take a look at naval battles, since they decided to put that here. As one of your actions you can take, right, there is deploying the fleet. You send a fleet that you had to prepare, you had to pay for it during the reinforcements phase. You will not be allowed to send a fleet out unless you paid to outfit it for battle. But you can take 1 command to send it out to a sea zone. When the fleet's deployed, each player rolls a die. Whoever controls the fleet adds the strength of the fleet. The other side adds 1 if he controls the sea zone. 1 if he controls London and the sea zone's the Atlantic. 1 if he controls Gibraltar and the sea zone's the Mediterranean. This is a little different from NPWS. And NPWS itself seems to have changed. Instead of control of Gibraltar, the Alliance gets a point for capture Minorca event. However, and before it used to be the English just got an automatic +2, and the French got the strength of their fleet, and that's it. Okay. If the active player wins, he gains control of the sea zone. He gets a victory point, and the fleet is removed from the map and returned to the force pool. Well, the way that you mark control of the sea zones is by putting the fleet out there. So that seems like a mistake in the rules, but and it's one of the things that, like, it doesn't quite work for me in terms of the rules. Don't seem to be completely in line with themselves. Supply. Okay, you can trace a line of supply that goes through a port and then goes through a friendly controlled sea zone to another port. Neither of those ports can be besieged if you're going to trace further than the port. Otherwise, it's just tracing through areas that you control. Now, some of those areas could be besieged, and that creates something called a threatened supply line, where you're able to still push the supplies through that area. It hasn't completely fallen. don't think of Besiege as a single major city that's blocked there. There's a lot of other space there and a lot of other, that is protected and that you're able to slide the supplies through. Your supply source is your capital. It doesn't have to be your own capital for some purposes, but for the purpose of reinforcements and replacement points, it does. There's some reinforcements that are on the track here. I didn't talk about them. They just show up on the turn they're supposed to. There's some rules about them, so some of them are going to the force pool, which I'm keeping over there in Poland or whatever, because there's other units that aren't available to play yet that I'm keeping in the counter tray. Okay, we already talked a little bit about the resource points in play. Okay, but what we didn't talk about is how you get these. The Alliance gets 6, the Bourbons 3. The start spaces, not right there. Maybe the no peace without Spain one, because it's not really 3. Okay, wealthy spaces increase it by 1 each. Wealthy spaces have coins on them. For example, Milan here is a wealthy space. But because there's more wealthy spaces in this game, even though this is the printed map, they give you wealthy spaces for London and Munich. Those get removed for no peace without Spain. So the French are going to get a point for each wealthy space that they control. And that's probably why there's a 4, because they control London at the beginning of the game. And none of these count as wealthy. Just making sure. Okay, so they control London at the beginning of the game, so that actually puts them at 4, but their base value is 3. Okay. The Alliance player gets a point if he controls London and all spaces in Ireland. I don't think he controls any spaces in Ireland at this point, but I'm not sure because he's got that there, but there's no control marker there. Well, never mind. That's not the Alliance player, so it doesn't make a difference. At certain turns, leaders get promoted, and if they're already, some of these leaders, for example, this guy start out as an unnamed leader, and they can flip over to their named leader. If later they get eliminated, they come back as the unnamed leader. All leaders have an unnamed leader on the other side. All right, for the campaign phase, we already discussed how it kind of begins with the placing down cards. Hey, who played the higher? And we talked about the different actions you can choose. Let's talk about land movement. So in order to make movement, as long as it's not transfer or sea action, or through a retreat, you can only move and intercept, and I believe avoid battle as well. And then I'm not sure about that, but you can only move and intercept if you're commanded by a leader, and it can be up to 2 leaders. The full value of their command rating is how many that you can move about. Your land movement is going to give you 3 movement points in general, and you move it as a stack. You can drop units off as you go. You cannot pick units up. And remember, so if I move a stack with a core, and I drop the core off after 1 move, I can't use my same card, another point off that card, to move that core again or do anything else with it for that matter. Okay. You cannot enter an enemy-controlled space which is either like Spain is alliance controlled to begin with, so there's no marker there. But for example, these are Bourbon controlled spaces at the start of play, even though they're not part of the home nation. If you're not leaving a friendly controlled space. If you enter an enemy occupied or enemy controlled space, you have to pause and give the opponent a chance to intercept or avoid battle, or if they're still there with troops, they can fight. Battle doesn't prevent you from moving, although losing a battle does. It doesn't cost you any movement points. If you end up succeeding in winning the battle, you can keep moving. You cannot immediately siege the location like if you attack a fortress. If you enter a space with an enemy leader, the leader can run away, but if he's not able to run away, you capture him. Whenever you enter an unfortified space that's enemy controlled, you're allowed to spend a movement point there. In addition, well, it costs a movement point to flip it over. Sea movement, you're allowed to move up to 2 corps and any number of leaders from one port to another port. It says any number of leaders. I think that can be 0, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure you need a leader, but you definitely need a leader if you're going to attack an enemy an enemy space. You need to have the leader and a corps. Well, at least 1 corps. To an enemy-controlled port. The way you tell ports from other things, there's no anchors or anything in here, it's that the name of the city or location is in the water. Okay, so when you do a land movement, or a sea move for that matter, it's possible that someone can, no. If you do a land movement, it's possible that the enemy can intercept you. It's got to be an enemy-controlled or occupied space. And basically, use this little chart here. And there's a lot of charts in this game. You roll, you add your tactical rating, which may be modified, and you need a 6 or higher. And then you can move into the space. And then you're the defending player in the space still, but you've got more troops there. And you can't intercept through an overstack or anything like that. The attacker must fight, I believe, if he's intercepted. Unless, yeah, there's a potential way out of there that's not clearly discerned, but I would say fortified lines can allow the attacking player to leave if he's unable to force the line. Okay, if you're moved into, you also have the option to try to avoid battle, and that's kind of handled similarly. You roll a die, you add the TR of your avoiding leader, and you need a 5 or higher to get away. But there's an automatic withdrawal opportunity, which is if you're in a friendly fortress, you can leave. And if you've got a friendly fortress there, you can always leave a garrison behind. These are 2 different concepts that are both in play here. So you can always withdraw from a space if you've got a friendly fortress there. And then you have to do retreat rules into a friendly controlled and not enemy occupied space. Everything has to retreat together, or you can leave some behind, and you have to follow stacking. You can withdraw into the fortress even if you stick around there, but you can only pull 1 corps into the fortress as a garrison. Okay, fortified lines. These are the cool thing in the game. These are the thing that really adds to this. Let's see if we have one anywhere. There's one there. A level 1 fortified line. So, fortified lines are going to give you an advantage in combat. They basically give you a defensive advantage at level 1. They give you an offensive and defensive advantage at level 2. But the tricky part about them, or the cool thing about them, is if you're trying to attack into a fortified line, you get a chance to try to bypass that. and you make a roll on the fortified line bypass, you add your tactical rating, you subtract an enemy tactical rating. If it's a level 2 line, you lose another 1, and you have to get a 5 or higher. If you succeed in the 5 or higher, the fortified line has no effect. You've neutralized it by your maneuvering. If you don't, you have the option to turn around and leave. So you have this kind of, oh, let's see, I have kind of an advantage if I can get by that fortified line. I'll try. Oops, I didn't. I'm not going to push the attack across it. You can choose to, but the advantages of the line are quite significant, about equivalent to the advantages of a demoralized foe. Yeah. Okay. Speaking of which, let's talk about how battle itself happens. Basically, it's 1 die per core. But it's per full strength core. So if you have a couple half strength core, that gives you a die. You round up, and leaders, up to 2 leaders in this space, can add their tactical rating, assuming there are already that many. They can only add as many dice as there are core already present. So you get piles and piles of dice. Base thing, you hit on 5s and 6s. There's a limitation. You cannot hit an enemy more times than he has core. So if he's got like 4 full strength core and you do 10 hits to him, he only takes 4 of those hits and all of his core are flipped to half strength. You both roll your dice, you count up your hits, and you assess them on the opponent. Like I said, to hits are 5 or 6, but there's some modifiers to that. Demoralized forces only hit on a 6. A level 1 fortified line subtracts 1 from the die rolls that the enemy, that the attacking player takes. So he's going to have to roll 6s. If he's demoralized already, he wouldn't hit, but he wouldn't be attacking demoralized. So, level 2 fortified line gives you, as the defender, in addition to the -1 to your attackers, to the attacker's die rolls, gives you a +1 to your die rolls. So now you can hit on 4 5s or 6s, or 5 or 6 if you're demoralized. Whoever takes the most hits has to retreat. If neither side takes any hits, the attacker has to retreat. The retreating side will be demoralized, except in the case where neither side takes any hits. I'm sorry, if the 2 sides take equivalent number of hits, the attacker has to retreat. Leader casualties. This has been changed a little bit. Each leader present in the battle rolls a die, each named leader. On a 12, they'll be eliminated, and they're flipped over immediately to a minor leader. Used to be, you'd put them a turn in advance. And I don't know how that translates here. Like, the No Peace Without Spain rules kind of, it's not entirely clear how they integrate completely. Like, it's kind of, hey, you switch over to No Peace Without Spain unless it's one of these rules, but there are some exceptions that appear to be baked into the rules. Okay, on an 11, if you're the loser, you're captured. And that means you either agree to get your guy killed, or you pay a ransom in victory points equal to his tactical rating. Unless he's a king. If he's a king, you don't have that choice. One of those 2 options is taken for you. And he's worth 2 victory points if he's killed. If it's an 11 and you're the winner, or if it's a 10 on either side, you're wounded. The leader's pulled off the map and put on for the next turn, and there's a staff officer counter that'll replace the first leader that's wounded. And it's just one of these generic leaders, but it says staff officer. And It's just used for that special purpose. It'll be withdrawn from the game. It'll be withdrawn from the map afterwards. Okay. So, if the attacker has to retreat, he doesn't have to go back where he came from, but he does have to go back to an adjacent friendly controlled space. He couldn't have entered the space if he didn't come from a friendly controlled space, so there's always one option there. If the defender retreats, he can withdraw a core into the fortress, as long as there's room. He can retreat by sea, and both sides can do this. Sea retreats, like sea moves, have a chance of failing, though. Hey, I didn't go into that. He can retreat into a friendly adjacent space. If he can't successfully retreat all his units, then he's got the option to retreat through an enemy space, occupied or controlled space. And if it's the enemy is going to get a shot at you with as many battle dice for what's going through there, plus 1 die per fortress strength. And they all have a +1 DRM. And the hits are assigned as per battle, and they count towards a famous victory. This is important because sometimes it's impossible to inflict a famous victory on someone, but you can get it to them during the pursuit from another unit. You are allowed to overstack due to a retreat. So you won't be blocked off by other units in place, but it could end up wiping out some of your units if there's too many full strength core. Well, could reduce them. If you can't retreat at all, you're eliminated. All the leaders end up being captured. This all counts towards a famous victory. Okay, famous victories. In order to cause one, you have to have taken 5 actual hits in the battle. And remember, that means you have to have at least 5 core there. Or completely remove 2 core from the map during the battle. If either of these happens, a famous victory marker goes on the board for the right side. That marker is going to give you a couple of advantages. First, it gives you a couple of victory points for the winner of the battle. Secondly, in that space and all adjacent spaces, it goes a +2 to the siege resolution. What about siege resolution? Siege is an action that you take with one of your points. It's not listed here. It's a campaign action, but it uses your entire campaign action. It's almost like its own different action, basically. The way siege works is you have to have a number of strength points, just in core, at least equal to the current strength of the fortification. There it is. Including any garrison inside the fortification. And then you're going to roll a die, and the attacker and defender each take losses. Now, there's a number of modifiers there. One of the bigger one is the longer your siege is going, you keep getting a +1 per turn. Good leadership can give you modifiers. Lack of line of control gives you penalties, blah, blah, blah. The losses from the siege, well, the attacker is limited to 1 point of loss, but the defender might take up to 4. They first come off the fortress value. That'll get recuperated as soon as the siege is over. The fortress springs back to life. Then, after that's been reduced to 0, they start coming off of the garrison core. There can be at most 1 core there. If it's full strength, it gets flipped over with the first loss. The second loss, or the first loss if it's half strength, ends up with them surrendering the fortress and taking honors of war. If the fortress has no garrison, once it goes down to 0, the fortress surrenders and it switches sides. Victory points are gained for the fortress. We talked about King William's War enough, I think. Winter quarters phase. All the units pull back to friendly spaces. They do a retreat. This could end up in overstacking. The following markers come off the map. Famous victory, continued siege marker. You're booted out of all sieges at this point. Reduced fortress strength, demoralized. Fleet markers. So, yeah. You could also remove your fortified lines this step. Now, that made sense in No Peace Without Spain. There's a really interesting little thing here between the countermix and the rules. No Peace Without Spain has these guys back printed for the two sides. So like a fortified line 2 would be a fortified line 2 for the alliance on the other side. Here, these are marked 1s and 2s on each side, except the alliance ones, oops, they put the same number on both sides. That's just a typo. No Peace Without Spain, you were limited to the countermix. That meant something really weird because like it was as though only so much earth could be moved at this point. Not by one side, but in total. In this game, there's no limit whatsoever to how many fortified lines you have, so there's absolutely no reason to remove them. You draw fortified lines around Vienna, and now the battle's far away from Vienna. Nah, you just leave them there. They're not doing any harm to anybody. Okay, anyway. Okay, it's possible that control of the Atlantic changes. If London is alliance controlled and Beachy Head's not in effect, it switches. If Beachy Head is in effect, it switches or it becomes Bourbon controlled. Otherwise, it's not going to auto control. Some victory points change. 2 victory points for London being Bourbon controlled. Savoy might declare neutral. That's, I believe, off a card. Maybe I'm wrong. If London's Bourbon controlled and the Atlantic is under alliance controlled, the Glorious Revolution can happen. This is a special rule and the only scenario, basically. And then you check to see if the game ends through either an automatic victory or if it's the last turn, you count up the points. Scenario, there's a list of where everything sets up. Always starts in the same place. Special rules. Let's breathe a little. Give me a moment. I gotta paste this thing together anyway. Okay, both games have these kind of a set of special rules that kind of break the rules of the scenario. So, 1688 turn begins with the campaign phase with only 3 action cards dealt during the turn. You know, not go through the events and all that. Glorious Revolution in London during 1688 and 89. Sea movement can involve up to 6 corps from a single port if William III is involved in the move. And this costs 2 action points. At the end of such a sea move, in any battles, if William III is in London, the Glorious Revolution takes place. A number of things happen. Marlborough becomes British instead of Jacobite. All kind of good stuff happens. This is pretty hard to not have happen unless for some reason the alliance player chooses not to do it. Now, during any Winter's Quarter phase after 1688, in which London is Bourbon controlled and the Atlantic is taken by the alliance, the Glorious Revolution happens a little differently. Now, it doesn't say it can only happen once. London becomes alliance controlled. Prince Waldeck is removed from the game. I guess you just don't get him. I think it can only happen once. But anyway, this ends up means if Philipsburg becomes Bourbon controlled during 1688 or 89, then the Mainz province also becomes Bourbon controlled. Up here. Philipsburg's over here, Mainz is over here. But without any victory points changing hands. No victory points changing hands. All these automatic things, they don't happen. Okay, this is not really that big a deal. The alliance forces withdraw. The interesting part is the Grand Campaign game and how you switch over to this. And basically, you merge it into No Peace Without Spain. you set up No Peace Without Spain's event deck. You remove the 2 wealthy markers; those aren't going to affect anymore. The Alliance and Bourbon resource points are set to 6 and 4. The victory point marker's going to be reset to 10. Okay, so you don't do this if it's an automatic victory by taking Vienna, Amsterdam, or Paris, or if the Bourbon player owns London at the end of the game. So it is likely to happen. Okay. The victory point marker will get marked 10, and if one side or the other won a major victory in the 9 Years' War, they get 1 point in their favor. Atlantic is worth a victory point for the Bourbon. Mediterranean is worth a victory point for the Alliance player if they're controlled at the end of the game by those players. If Savoy is neutral, it joins the Bourbons. And otherwise, it stays Alliance controlled. And if the Alliance plays Savoy switches sides somehow, I don't think that's a hold card, so there should not be any event cards there. So unless it's a hold card, I don't know why that's there, but that would give 2 victory points to the Alliance player if somehow that was allowed to happen. The Spanish align themselves with whoever won the 9 Years' War. They start out as Alliance power, Habsburg controlled. They could, historically, they end up being Bourbon controlled for the next game. A little bit of fiddling around. William's War goes away, and the Habsburg Corps. There's some extra troops in Spain that that are available to indicate rebellions. The Jacobites leave everywhere outside of Ireland. Bavaria goes neutral, and they're going to be pro-Bourbon for the next game. You end up having to basically switch to the counter mix of the other game. And that's going to be kind of a tricky thing going on. Because some of the pieces will be from this game, some from that game. Got to kind of remember where they come from, and that could actually be a pain in the ass in some cases. The Atlantic becomes permanently Alliance controlled. You place the Atlantic fleet in the control box. The Mediterranean becomes Bourbon controlled. The Bray fleet leaves the game. The Med fleet is available in the Alliance force pool. From this time on, only Toulon and the Med fleet can be commissioned, deployed, and used to gain control. Now, this to me means you no longer use the No Peace Without Spain rules for naval control of the Mediterranean. You keep using these rules for it. And I don't know what that means, because there's different victory point rules for them. It just doesn't mesh together quite right. All named leaders not required by the NPWS scenario are removed from the game. Okay, that's fine. And then you start No Peace Without Spain with a shortened turn. Now there's something that I missed here. Okay, so No Peace Without Spain starts in 1702. This ends no later than 1899, which means there's a couple of years that have to be accounted for. The way they're done is you play these special short turns. Each side gets a resource point for reinforcements. And the player who lost the 9 Years' War can basically take over a lost space in one of their home countries, a fortified space. And if they take level 1 fortified spaces, they can take 2 of them. And these do not change any victory points or anything. They just give you control as you kind of regain territories. You replace some of the leaders as well. Special rules 3 and 4 of NPWS, which I think are, there's some first turn jumps on the board. Those aren't going to be happening because instead, what's up? I don't know. We'll see how that works. There's a few optional battle rules, or optional rules here. Historical economy gives the Brits a chance to play the Bank of England more quickly. Battle rerolls. So this is an interesting one, and I haven't decided yet. If you have an advantage in tactical writing, you get to re-roll the difference number of dice. And I guess that's either player's dice. So you can try to take hits away from an enemy or generate more hits yourself. Wounded leaders. So here it says use wounded leader rules mentioned in this rule book. Yeah, well, that makes sense, but why just that rule? Why is this not there? I guess mentioned above includes this, but special historical leader abilities. So this is really interesting. Many of the leaders in the game, and it can be different for each game, have a special ability. So like Eugen has TR3 during battles involving no other friendly named leaders here. And he has that here, but if you're using rerolls, he's allowed to reroll an additional die if Marlborough's present. Let's look at Marlborough. He can use his CR only to control British units. Okay. This is a stripped down lower ranked Marlborough. If he's a Jacobite, he rolls a d6 at the beginning of the battle. On a 4 through 6, his tactical rating drops to 0. Too much political problems with James. But here, after a force attacked by Marlborough successfully avoids battle, roll a die. On a 1, the avoid battle fails. So Marlborough can force a battle when people normally would be able to even do it automatically. So there's some interesting little things here. One that I really like, Boufflers, goes to TR2 for siege combat. He was very effective at Liege. You have Vauban. When activated to siege, make 2 siege rolls and choose one of them. And he's a decent leader too. Probably too good a tactical leader for the game, but they wanted to give him some capability for handling sieges. So I think that's most of the rules. With luck, we'll make it through and be able to play No Peace Without Spain after it and figure out, some of the mechanics of like actually making that transition a little better than I've explained. But yeah, and I hope to start tomorrow morning, I guess. Right then. Oh, I guess. Yeah, I'm up in my loft. I'll show you a peek. This is just such an exciting place to me. You got you down there. I got a spiral staircase too. Something I've always wanted. And I've got my games, the half of them that I've got here. And then, of course, I've also got messes already accumulating. It honestly takes me forever. I've got like 2 rooms that are complete messes right now. I've been here for almost a month now. And it really ought to be 3 rooms, but at some point I'll have it cleaned enough that I can give you guys a real walk through the place, but it's really kind of cool. All right, let's send this up.